Hi, and welcome to another ASMR video. Once again, I apologize for a bunch of things. To start off with, it's been a while since my last video. Secondly, you can see the microphone in the bottom of the video. I hope it's not too distracting for you. I also happen to be very hot today for some reason. So I've got my window open and I hope that it's not too loud outside. But with my apologies out of the way, today I'm going to be doing the same thing that I've been doing. I mentioned in my last video, if you've seen it, that I was a little bit worried about my notes being too repetitive. A lot of my ideas are quite similar, but they at least have a similar vibe. And I can understand how it can be quite boring listening to me sort of say the same thing in a slightly different way over and over again. So I apologize for that, but for now I'm still gonna be reading the notes. And potentially after I've done with this video, the next time I do one of these, I'll maybe answer a question or something instead. Okay, well, I think we should just jump straight into the notes and see what it's like. Okay, so this one starts off with a quote that I assume I read or heard somewhere, and then I go on to sort of expand on it with my own thoughts. So the quote is, "In a massacre, there is no good place to stand." And then I go on to say, "Sometimes in life, you end up in a situation with no good options. The best thing you can do is to analyze all of the options and choose the least worst one. Then, know that you're strong enough to handle whatever the outcome of that option will be. And then look back and figure out what decisions you made that led you into that situation. A lot of the time, you stumble into a room and only realize after the doors are locked that there's a massacre happening in there. Unfortunately in life, sometimes you have to get massacred in order to learn how to avoid ending up in that room again." So I think what I've done there is sort of expanded on the analogy of this massacre by adding the analogy of being in a room with a massacre. I think I already mentioned at the beginning that maybe a lot of my notes have very similar, at least a very similar vibe to them. I think a lot of them don't really seem very hopeful. I'm actually pretty sure that somebody mentioned in the last video that I did, they left a comment saying something along the lines of, next time can you say something like everything's gonna be okay instead of the things that I've been saying. And I can understand why that would be a little bit more down your alley, but you have to understand that all of these ideas and these notes that I make, they happen to be my brain's way of dealing with my own mental health. Sounds a little bit overly dramatic, but it is what it is. So it turns out that for whatever reason, the most effective way for me to deal with, I guess, depression or anxiety or whatever the issues I might have is a little bit more of a tough love approach as opposed to trying to comfort myself. And from a logical perspective, that is what makes the most sense to me. I've never been the kind of person that receives any kind of comfort or satisfaction from someone putting their hand on my shoulder and telling me that everything's going to be okay. As far as I can tell, that really doesn't solve the problem. Maybe it will make you feel better in the short term, and it'll kind of distract you from whatever's going on, and it'll give you this sort of artificial good feeling inside your body, but it just never felt like it actually solved anything for me, you know. So I think I prefer to look at things as brutally realistic as they are and just try and come to terms with it. And I feel like in reality, most of things that exist in life are not what we want them to be, especially living in the society that we live in, where we're surrounded by social media and TV shows and movies and songs, different forms of entertainment that try and paint life in a very positive way, naturally so, which I think is a good thing. But I think one of the negatives of that good thing is that it creates an expectation of life that's quite unrealistic. And even though we all are way more privileged than anybody that came before us, and we all have the opportunity to genuinely live these amazing happy lives, and to an extent we do, I think this expectation that we're sort of entitled to happiness and comfort, and that it's like an unbelievable tragedy to have to go through suffering in life, is interesting when you take into consideration the fact that almost every human that's ever existed would have expected pain and suffering as a complete normality, and probably would have just considered themselves lucky if they were able to have moments in their life that were comfortable and contained some level of happiness. So once again, that probably all sounded really bleak and dark, but in a way it really comforts me. And I do think, in my personal experience, that it's the best way to actually strengthen yourself mentally. I think if you're the kind of person that is hearing the things that I'm saying and it really bothers you and it really upsets you and you feel like it gets rid of all your hope and it depresses you, I think unfortunately that might be a sign of mental weakness. And I'm not saying that as an insult. I'm saying that as maybe a potential warning for you to do some self-analysis and realize that if these ideas and thoughts are all it takes for you to be depressed, that's a pretty severe weakness. And that weakness is something that's going to potentially affect you very negatively in your life. So to get back to the actual note itself, I'm using this analogy of ending up in a room where there's a massacre happening and the door's locked, so you're not able to actually get out of the room. Now the quote is, to say it one more time, in a massacre there is no good place to stand. So in my analogy, it doesn't matter where you decide to stand in this room, eventually you're going to get massacred. You're part of this massacre, regardless of what decisions you might make once you're in that room. And I think that's a good analogy for many situations that people find themselves in life, where you find yourself in a situation, whether it's your fault or not, where you basically have no good options. It doesn't really matter what you do, what you say, how you act, you're kind of just gonna have to deal with the negative consequences of being in that situation regardless of what you do. And again, this is one of those uncomfortable realities of life. I think it's pretty much, for most people at least, inevitable. And I think even if you're somehow lucky enough to avoid this kind of situation, you might as well expect that it's going to happen at some point so you can be prepared for it. You know, I think it's a bit of a cliche, but it's a very good mentality to expect and be prepared for the worst. So I guess this note is me trying to figure out for myself what the best course of action would be if you find yourself in this metaphorical room. If you end up in one of these situations in life where it seems like you have no good options, and where it seems like no matter what you're about to do, you're going to have to deal with something bad. And it doesn't matter how smart or lucky you might be. Like I said, I think these scenarios are inevitable for everyone at some point in their life. And so based on this note, I guess the best thing for me to do, at least from what I can decipher so far, is to, at the very least, try and choose the option that's going to be the least bad. Because even if all options are bad, it doesn't mean that they are equally as bad. So I think trying not to give up and trying not to become too overly emotional in these situations, and actually still have the ability to, with a clear mind, analyze all your different options and come to a decent conclusion as to which is best for you in that moment, is still an important skill to have. And then on top of that, to understand that you're actually strong enough mentally to deal with whatever the consequences are. I think that's a very simple mentality to have, but it's very, very effective, to the point where it really can make you, in a weird way, invincible in life. Because if you come to a simple conclusion and a simple realization that you actually have the capability of coping with any level of psychological pain, then there's really nothing that can happen to you in life that is gonna be detrimental to you. So obviously that doesn't change preferences, the obvious preference of not wanting to deal with bad things in life, but it does mean that you can sort of give yourself this confidence going into any situation in life that I know that this is going to be bad. I know it's going to be painful and uncomfortable. I know that there are going to be a list of negatives that are going to happen as a result of this thing, but it doesn't really matter, because I know that at the end of the day it's going to be over, and I'm going to have handled it as it was happening, and eventually I'm going to get to a point where it's going to be in the past. So I think that's a very simple, maybe too simple of a mentality to have, but I find it very helpful. I suppose some level of self-confidence is pretty necessary for that, but even if you don't have that self-confidence yet, understand that you have the capability of achieving that self-confidence at the very least. So it's something to maybe work towards. And then I mentioned how, let's say in hindsight of this hypothetical event, in hindsight of this massacre, you can analyze what it is that happened before the massacre, before you got into that room, to realize if it was decisions that you made that ended up getting you in that room. And if it was, then you can of course make sure that you don't make those decisions again. Because a lot of the times, you make decisions in life that you don't even realize are leading you down a path. So even if you end up in this room and you come to the conclusion that it's not your fault that you're in that room, that let's say you get to the door and somebody pushes you in and then locks it, according to this analogy, and then you get massacred. It's very easy for most people in that scenario to spend their entire life blaming the person that pushed them and locked the door, blaming the person that massacred them, blaming maybe the owner of the building, let's say, for not explaining that was a dangerous room to go into. It's always very easy to point the finger and blame others for where you end up in life. But if you trace your steps far back enough, you will eventually, most of the time I assume, get to a point where you realize there was a decision that you made, and it was 100% your decision, that got you in a situation that eventually led you to that room. So maybe it was a simple decision of walking into the building to begin with. And then maybe once you got to the building, it was a bunch of other people's decisions that led you into the specific room that got you massacred. But if you had never gone into the building in the first place, you would have never ended up in the room. So being able to analyze it and not have any bitterness and not have any anger and not have any self-loathing or self-pity and not pointlessly blame other people, even if you have every right in the world to blame them, even if you know that nobody would ever disagree with you, when you say that it was their fault and not yours, come to a simple understanding that you don't really actually have anything to gain from blaming other people. Even if it is definitively their fault, you don't really have anything to gain from that. So I think once this hypothetical bad thing has happened to you in life, the sooner that you can let go of any kind of bitterness, the sooner that you can let go of any blaming of other people, the better. Because as soon as you let go of that, you can actually retrace your steps and figure out what was the latest point that I made a decision that led me to that situation was. And then, like I said, you can sort of make sure that that doesn't repeat itself. So in this metaphor, make sure you don't ever go back to that building, because if you do, you might get pushed and locked in a room and get massacred, apparently. So I think a pretty deep analogy, a metaphor there that I really like. The initial idea was from a quote. I don't know where that quote was from, but I tried to expand on it. I spent about 15 minutes on that one, so we'll see how many of these notes I can get through. The next note is, I spent a long time as a teenager being tortured by my thoughts. I think because of how intense my internal dialogue is. For a long time, it seemed like my extreme level of self-awareness, or self-consciousness as I used to think of it as, was a curse. But now I see it as a blessing. I had to get through all of the negative, confusing stages of figuring out my mind. Depression and anxiety were inevitable results of me relentlessly thinking and trying to answer the questions that my mind were giving me. I didn't know the answers, and I think that most people are able to just ignore their internal questions if it makes them uncomfortable. I wasn't able to do that, which was bad for me. But eventually, because I thought about it so hard and for so long, I came up with my own answers to these questions. And that's where I feel I am now. I feel like I have the answers. I feel mentally strong, like I can handle anything. Whenever I read these notes back, I always feel like I sound so overly dramatic. I think when I'm typing them out, I'm not thinking that way. I just think that it's kind of difficult to type it out in a way that doesn't sound almost like melodramatic. So I kind of hate reading these notes back sometimes. But letting go of all of that and actually trying to, delve into the context of what I'm saying here. I guess this is just me remembering what I was like as a teenager and how I really struggled a lot of the time with my internal dialogue, as I say. I did have a lot of self-consciousness, and it led to a lot of depression and social anxiety and a lot of mental issues in general, I think. But I now see all of those struggles as blessings, because without being able to do all of that, I wouldn't be in the place where I am now. This is all a bit of a cliche. I think you probably heard some version of this from somebody else at some point, but I guess this is just my own little version based on my own little life. But I think it's necessary to for almost all things that are worth having in life. In this case, we're talking about, let's say, my mindset that I see as a huge asset to me. In order for me to achieve this mindset, in order for me to have been able to reach this level of, intellectual prowess. Oh, sorry, I took so long to try and come up with a phrase there. I wouldn't have been able to reach this stage. Sorry, this is turning into a mess. I wouldn't have been able to reach this stage without having to go through the struggle and the confusion and the pain and the discomfort that comes with figuring everything out. And I think that's the case for everything. I think you can use very obvious real life examples of that. I mean, every single elite level athlete in the world has had to go through years of pain and suffering and confusion and being really bad at what they do in order to get to the point where they're really good. I think that that's the case for everything. I think in order to have a good life, you really need to go through pain and suffering and discomfort. You need to have experience of a horrible life in order to achieve that good life. I think that's just one of the inevitabilities of life in general. And I'm sure everybody has their own version of what is a pretty cliche idea. And that was a very long quote, but I don't really know if there's much for me to dissect. It was pretty self-explanatory. I do think that maybe I always felt like I was a bit of a rare case. I know that a lot of people deal with anxiety and depression, of course, but I've always felt quite unique in the level of self-awareness that I had, to the point where I'm pretty sure I used the term relentless when describing how much internal dialogue I had. I really sometimes am unable to focus on anything other than my own thoughts, which I'm sure is some mild psychological disorder or something that I have. But again, I always saw that as a curse and something that affected me in a negative way, but in reality it has led me to a point where I feel like I have a mindset that serves me very, very well. And I rarely see much use in comparing myself to others, but in this case it seems like so many other people are so oblivious to the way that they think, and they're just sort of like bumbling around in life, not really knowing what they're doing or why they're doing it, and they don't know what they think or feel or why they think or feel. And I assume it's because they never went through the processes that I went through. I assume it's because they never had years of relentless self-analysis and self-awareness. And it's not like my self-awareness has changed or dropped now that I've reached this pinnacle of, philosophical genius or anything. I'm still the same as I was, and I'm still going to keep on changing and adapting and evolving. I'm not going to act like I'm in my final form or anything. I'm only 22, and I'm sure that if you're older than me and you're listening to this, you probably are looking at me as some kind of naive kid who's still got so much to learn and so much to experience. And in 5, 10, 15 years, I might look back at these and think that I'm a complete idiot for thinking the way I think. But even if that is the case, that just means that I'll be looking at the way that I am now as a necessary step for me to eventually get to the next level of intellectual prowess, as I put it. So yeah, I think that's maybe an interesting thought. I think it's very beneficial every now and then to look back at your past self and try and acknowledge how much you've changed, especially if potentially you're the kind of person that maybe is changing for the worse. You need to actually realize and acknowledge that and change your ways. I think maybe I've got time for one more.